My Worcester was largely a neighborhood called Maine South. And Maine South was plagued with a lot of challenges: violence, drug addiction, homelessness, poverty, and those themes permeated the Wrenn family.
Welcome to Aspire, and I Have the Right to podcast. I'm Katie Shipp, and I'm so glad you're joining my co-host Susan and I for today's episode. Today, we have an incredible guest with us, Mal Wrenn Corbin, author of Raising Wrens. Born in Worcester, Massachusetts, Mal overcame a turbulent childhood to become a first-generation college graduate of Dartmouth College. She later earned her Master of Education's degree at Boston College and now works in business development for a leading financial services firm. She lives in Massachusetts with her husband and 20-year-old son. Before we dive into our conversation, let me introduce Raising Wrens. This deeply personal memoir weaves together Mal's childhood experiences in Worcester's Maine South neighborhood, a place where, as she puts it, the only way people got out was in a body bag. She takes us through the losses of her father, who was shot, and her brother, who died by suicide, revisiting the places where they fought, survived, and ultimately where she found a way to escape. Blending memoir with a fascinating exploration of wrens, the bird her family shares a name with, Mal's book paints a vivid picture of hardship and hope. Mal, welcome to Aspire.
Thank you so much, Katie and Susan. I'm really excited for our conversation today.
We are so excited to have you here with us and to hear about the process of writing this book and what it's been like since the book has been out. But let's start with your journey. What inspired you to write Raising Wrens, and what was it like to revisit these memories during the writing process?
Oh, it's a great question. And I'm sure we'll get into some of the detail, but in short, I had a pretty long road, and you touched on some of that. But early in life, there were a lot of challenges that I faced growing up in Worcester, but also as a member of the Wrenn family. And, I spent so much time and energy throughout the years really putting all of that in the rear view mirror and putting a focus on forward motion and looking toward the future. And I got really good at it. It definitely took some trial and error, but I was by and large really successful at doing that. But I think what I ultimately learned, well into my 40s, by the way, it took a long time to get there, was that all of that history and all of that trauma was still right there in that rear view mirror. I wasn't going to escape it. I was never going to outrun it. And I eventually got to a point where I felt I needed to reclaim that history for myself. It wasn't something to feel shame in. In fact, I could feel a lot of pride in and even being proud of the even more whole human being, and I could even say more beautiful human being for weathering everything that I endured. So what better way to reclaim all of that history than to put it down on paper and share it far and wide?
I love that, Mal. And I also love literature, and I love the fact that you weave in stories about wrens, the birds that your family shares a name with. And so can you say more about that? What drew you to this comparison, and how do you feel it adds to the depth of your story?
I think my experience is there are so many powerful stories in there. And I think what I've learned in sharing that is there are a lot of people that can relate to those experiences, which has just been just an amazing experience for me. But also I wanted there to be some depth. I just saw some poetry, if you will, in our family name being the wren. And for anyone who knows birds or knows the wren bird species, they're not simply this cutesy little fluffy bird. They are, I would say, complicated. They're tough, and really they can live in an old rusty pipe, a dirty boot. They can live in urban areas, you name it. They're able to adapt and make it work. And so our family really lines up pretty well with the bird species as well. And so it seemed like a really beautiful way to kind of bring some poetry to our family history in this book that way too.
I think that's incredible. And I'm a real bird person. So every day, I think I've told you this, I go to my bird feeder and say, is that a wren? Could that be a wren? And I look at them with a whole new lens after reading your incredible story. And I might add, you and I share Worcester in common. Both my parents' sides of the family are from Worcester. And the fact, I've never read a book about Worcester ever. So
Same.
I really thank you for sharing what it was like to grow up there. I mean, my parents were of a different generation than yours, but I could picture the streets. They actually grew up on different sides of the track, if you will, in Worcester. So I could really picture what you were talking about. And it gave me such new hope for trying to reach those communities with some of the colleges in Worcester that we're going to be working with in the future.
We tend to see, particularly in the movies, for example, we see a lot of stories about Boston and some of the larger urban areas across this country and the challenges that people often see there. Right. We don't typically hear of stories of Worcester, and Worcester is, I would say, a great example of lots of places across our country, right? Worcester is an old factory town, and to your point, where you maybe grew up in a different area of Worcester, my Worcester was largely a neighborhood called Main South. And Main South was plagued with a lot of challenges like violence, drug addiction, homelessness, poverty. And that was, those themes permeated the Wrenn family too. So we fit in really well, I would just say, in Worcester. But getting back to that point, Susan, in that there are lots of towns across this country like Worcester that I think a lot of people can relate to these challenges in navigating life in a tough place.
Right. Oh my gosh, Mal, I'm remembering our dinner conversation about this. So I think we realized I was in college. If any of my Holy Cross former classmates or current students at Holy Cross are listening, or at Assumption University, I was on campus when you were going to the Mustard Seed in Worcester. And some of our fellow students were going there to volunteer there. And it was a gut punch to think you were suffering so much while I was a student on campus there.
I mean, thank you for sharing that. It also kind of hurts my heart that you would feel a gut punch, because I never want anybody to feel, I guess, guilty for, maybe having good in their lives when someone like myself or others might be really facing difficult times. That's certainly not the mission of the book. But I think, my hope is that people can see and maybe better understand the complexity of the human condition and the complexity of family relationships, really. There's great depth there. And thankfully, some of the beauty in being a child is you don't always necessarily know how tough it is. Thankfully, I mean, certainly, there will come a time when you realize that, but I'm grateful for those early days where there was so much bad, but I didn't necessarily always know it, and there were always also very tender and sweet moments and memories, particularly, catching grasshoppers with my brother in a little abandoned lot, as a simple example. So yeah, but thank you for sharing that.
Throughout the book, you speak of your two younger siblings who were twins, and it's such a beautiful story of just being siblings and sticking together through a hard time. And you're the oldest of three. I'd love to hear from you about how you think that maybe shaped your journey, and your sense of responsibility growing up. Each of you ended up having very different paths that you went down, but just for those who haven't had the chance to read the book yet, just, if you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. And if you don't mind, Katie, great question. If I can, maybe I'll set the stage a little bit and share some of that background. So, early on in life. So yes, you're right. I'm the oldest of three. My brother and sister, twins, a year younger than me, Davy and Lisa. And my parents, my father, I would call him feisty by nature. He definitely struggled with authority. He was a day laborer, and he might land a job and before day's end be fired. That would not be atypical. He really struggled with alcohol addiction, and he never completed the 6th grade. My mother, on the other hand, was very happy-go-lucky. I would call her a little bit like head in the clouds, light and airy, intelligent. And she struggled with some drug addiction early on. It didn't seem to be a major factor in our lives at that point. But you're right. I was the oldest, and there were things that would unfold. The memory that comes to mind when you ask that question about being the oldest, there was a time when I was 6 and the twins were 5, and my parents, I don't know where they went, but they were off somewhere on their own for a few days, and the 3 of us were home alone. And I don't know if it's just innate in us as the oldest. I'm not sure, but you just take it upon yourself in that scenario to say, okay, I'm in charge here. I've got these twins are almost, if you think about toddlers, how they might be nipping at your heels, or a puppy might be nipping at your heels. That's what it was like with the twins. Like, they were looking to understand where mom and dad were. When are they coming home? We're hungry. Where are we going to eat? And so taking it upon myself to say, okay, let's head to the park. I know people have McDonald's Happy Meals there from time to time, and maybe we can find something. So it's a great question. I'm not sure if that's just something that, again, is it innate and you just jump into action, but you figure out a way to survive, really.
And it's your brother's story and what eventually happened to him when he went back to Worcester that starts the book for our readers and starts the story. You're sharing your family story. Can you tell us a little bit about what it was like when you came back to Worcester whenever your brother passed away?
Yes. So as I shared earlier, I would say, when I was a teenager, those later teenager years was when I had decided I really need to get out of here and change my life, and put all things Worcester in the rear view mirror. And so I really, right or wrong, it wasn't Worcester's fault, really, my experience, but so many of those memories and traumas were rooted there, that I had to leave all things Worcester in that rear view mirror too. And so I really tried to steer clear by and large. But what interesting is not the right word. That doesn't feel right. But, I had decided to write this book about 7 years ago now. And very shortly after I had started to work on the book, my brother committed suicide there in Worcester. And you're right. So I had to go back, of course, to, claim his body and settle his affairs and, take care of the business end of things. But it was, of course, so much more than that, right? It was really the start of facing all of that history. And ironically, that was not part of my plan with writing the book. My intent was I had all of these memories stored up and I would share them. So it's wild to me to think that through my brother's death, it really truly forced me to genuinely revisit. And we just, along with my husband and my sister and even my mom, navigating those streets, because in the course of my first 17 years, I had lived in 17 different places, most of those in this small neighborhood of Maine South in Worcester. And so we would drive these streets, and gosh, I remember this apartment and that apartment. And so the exercise of writing this book was much more therapy than I had probably bargained for. And in a strange way, I'm grateful for my brother, I guess, forcing that a bit, if you will.
It brings me back to what you said earlier during our conversation, where you said, whenever you were able to get out and go to college, you really tried to push that into the back of your mind and move forward. And it seems like when that happened and you had to go back, it really pushed it forward and forced you, maybe more so than you were even able to recognize prior to it happening, but forced it to the forefront in your mind.
As a mother of a sexual assault survivor who has also written a memoir, I just want to remind everyone that healing is not linear. It comes in fits and starts. And how incredibly brave it was of you, Mal, to, commit to writing this memoir about your life at such a maybe crucible moment of, being confronted with your brother's suicide and his leaving this world, and you're moving forward. So I just want to say to you, I'm so incredibly moved by your bravery to do that.
Thank you for that. And thank you. And I'm grateful for, her ability to tell such a powerful story. It is quite a journey, and it's quite a journey in putting that out into the world and sharing such personal experiences. You're coming from such a vulnerable place. And to your point, that healing journey is not linear. And it's funny to me now, I can look back and think, wow, once I had broken free, if you will, or I thought I had broken free of it all. And I was able to land, to your point, Katie, at Dartmouth College and really start to build a life for myself. I am the mom of a beautiful, now 21-year-old boy. He just turned 21 yesterday. I've got to update my bio there.
Congratulations. He's
thank you. I feel so lucky. And my husband, I'm just so grateful for the human that he is. I've managed to build a successful financial services career. Now I'm an author. So, it all looks like great success, and it is. But I had always thought of myself as, I'm well adjusted. I've got this beat, and I'm just going to keep moving forward. But it really wasn't until I was in my 40s where I realized, no, there's actually some work to do here, and it's not about simply running away from it all. And so I'm just really grateful for this time in my life where I can feel, I don't know if at peace is the right word, because I think for every survivor of sexual assault and other significant trauma, I think it can really dog you and haunt you really all of your life, unless you can somehow come to some sort of understanding of the why. And in a lot of cases, you never get those answers. So I think I feel like I'm probably as at much peace as I can be, but you never get all of the answers. And so that's the tough piece with trauma, I think.
I just want to point out to our listeners that, Mal, you are a decade younger than I am, and Katie's a decade or so younger than you. And of course, Jesse's a decade younger than Katie. So, but from my perch here, I just want to say I have come to the understanding this is the human condition, to find out the why. And for anyone who's listening who hasn't found their why yet, that's why we're here with this podcast, trying to lift the veil a little bit. And also that there really is no escaping it. At age 50, my daughter was sexually assaulted, and it felt like God energized me to put everything I had learned together in that moment, including my professional career in marketing, and to move forward with every ounce of learning and strength to get through this. And here we are, a full-blown organization. I have the right to trying to educate students in the world about their rights to a life free from sexual assault. And, I am committed to getting to schools in Worcester right now for both your legacy and my own family's legacy of unaddressed trauma and their past. And it all makes sense. It really does. And I don't think we're ever finished, Mal. We're never finished learning.
Right. I think you're right. We're never finished. And I'm so proud and grateful for the work that you all in this organization is doing. It's critical. It's such a pervasive issue, right? We see that in the statistics day in and day out, unfortunately. And the root, I do think the root of it is education. And so I love this organization's mission, and I feel incredibly lucky and fortunate and hopeful to be a part of the conversation and hopefully part of the broader work going forward.
I just want to echo what both of you are saying. I've worked with survivors since I was in law school, well over a decade now. And we do this work because survivor voices are so important. And it's important for people to know that sexual abuse is more common than we think. But another reason why I think it's so important for young people to hear directly from survivors is that every survivor that I've gotten the chance to work with is so resilient and so strong. And there's so much that our kids can learn from them. And that's why voices like yours are so important, because life threw a lot of hard things at you and you kept going. And we all have to help each other keep going and navigate it. And it's through these stories that survivors listening to this, who maybe are very early on in their journey, or maybe older survivors who have just been trying to push it into the rearview mirror this whole time, can listen and hopefully find a way to keep going along their journey too. That's one of the things that I wanted to ask you about during our conversation today. You know, as we talked about, your childhood had a lot of hardships: homelessness, food scarcity, the adults in your life struggling with mental health and addiction, sexual abuse. And every time I read your book, I reread it again before our conversation today, I always think this is a story of resilience. And despite these challenges, you were able to break that cycle and build a different life for yourself. And I think that those people who are listening would love to know how you think you were able to do that. What helped you along that path, and what advice might you have for others who are maybe walking that path now?
Oh, Katie, that's a good one. I think, there are so many things, but I think one of the most important things that's been important for me to remember is that I'm going to try to not cry.
Oh, it's okay. It's okay to be emotional.
It's okay.
It's our strength, I think.
There are so many good people in the world. It is so difficult, I think, oftentimes for people who experience sexual assault and more broadly trauma in general, to be fearful and want to wall off the heart and close off, and not trust, understandably so. And you rattled off a lot of different traumas that I experienced in my life, and the list goes on. And so there's been a lot of bad. There have been a lot of, I'll say in quotations, bad actors, if you will. Not bad people. I do believe people are inherently good. But there were a lot of people that did badly by me and my siblings, by the way. But for every bad thing that occurred, every trauma, every bad actor that I came across, there were more good people, more good things. And they might have been seemingly small instances, but they can have a huge impact. So I think that's an important people for people, for everyone really, is please don't underestimate the power of seeing others. And I think for survivors to truly be cognizant of the negative story that you can have imprinted on your brain from somebody else devaluing you, that negative self-worth story, you've got to rewire your brain and create new pathways that tell a different story. So number one, I think it's about being open to the good, look for the good people. And number two, be cognizant of that negative self-talk. And I think there are a few ways you can do that, but you've got to rewire those pathways in your brain to tell a positive story, because we are all deserving of a healthy and happy family life, happy and healthy relationships.
I remember in your book, I was rooting for the Polish boyfriend at one point. My family is Polish. All my family from Worcester is Polish. And I was like, wow. And he was going to get you a dress for the prom. And your relatives said, no, that's not appropriate. And I remember thinking, but yes, she deserves a great dress for the prom. And I mean, we can all relate to so much of what you talk about in this book. I mean, anyone, mothers, daughters, aunts, sisters, uncles, brothers should read your book, Mal, because we can relate to so many of the scenes you paint for us about just growing up and how hard it is. And then you find this way to have a road, through all these terrible predicaments. Mal, can you speak to what I think a lot of survivors could relate to, the residual shame anyone can feel after sexual assault, which happened to be by a boyfriend of your mother's that you were living with, and actually the conflicted relationship you must have felt, because here he was feeding you and sheltering you and teaching you things, and then making you sleep in his bed and sexually assaulting you. How did you put that shame away to where it belonged and carve that path out of everything you were experiencing to a path to go to college, to be the first in your family to go to college, and then to go to one of the best colleges in the country, Dartmouth University? How did you navigate that?
Well, I would say early on, and even through my college years and beyond, if I'm being completely transparent, I squashed it. I squashed it down. I had become a master, I would say, of reinvention, along with living in 17 different places. By the time I was 17, I had also been to 2 different middle schools and 3 different high schools. So at age 14, spending the night in my girlfriend's closet hiding from her parents and having a goth haircut and,
And
not that there's anything wrong.
Drinking the whole bottle of Fanta, was it?
The root beer.
Root beer. Where's the root beer? She's yelling downstairs. And you're in the closet drinking it. I love that scene.
And Fanta's great, by the way, as well,
Okay.
just for the record. And not that there's anything wrong with goth haircuts, but I looked like a poor soul who was living in a dark place. And I was literally living in a dark place at 14 years old. To fast forward to age 15, and I'm at a new high school, and all of a sudden I've got a Sally Jesse Raphael type bob haircut, and I'm wearing an Argyle sweater to school. Like, I truly just became, every move that happened, virtually, it was an opportunity for me to kind of change who I was. And I think that was a survival skill, but it didn't really address the shame. And really, I don't think it was even until well into my adult years that, I learned some strategies. Certainly therapy is, I can't say enough about therapy and having a great therapist. I'm so grateful for my therapist, Maria. But one of the things that's really helped, and this gets back to that negative self-worth story that's in your brain, was visualizing, the things that you're feeling shameful about, visualizing that happening to somebody else. Put somebody else in your shoes. Maybe it's a friend, a peer. And of course you wouldn't put shame on them. I think it was also helpful for me to even look at a picture of myself as a young child and then imagining those things. You've got to almost remove yourself from the trauma for a moment and try to view it more objectively. And so it just, because I think I had thought of myself as I'm fine. I survived it. I'm fine. Was it really that bad? And one of the things I noticed as a parent of this sweet little baby boy, as he grew up and grew through those ages that various traumas had taken place, I couldn't help but imagine, what if those things happened to him at that point in time? And you're just like, oh my gosh, that's just so awful. And that would certainly not have that would never be any fault of his own, of course. So I think those types of strategies are important. At least they were for me. I can't speak for everyone. But you're right. To your point, Susan, sometimes there's added complexity there. I mean, for me and my brother, by the way, coming from a home where we were living in squalor, there wasn't food on the table. There often wasn't heat or electricity. There was domestic violence going on. A lot of different challenges. And so when you find yourself in a setting now where you've got a warm bed and just in some strange way, normalcy, everything else is normal, but then there's sexual abuse happening. You, by the way, still as a child are trying to navigate, like, what's the lesser of the awful here? And ultimately just remembering, by the way, I was a child. Yeah. But I'm a work in progress. I haven't got it all figured out. I have to continually work at the shame piece of it. That's part of the struggle, I think, for us all.
I think that's such a common experience for survivors of childhood sexual abuse, is those conflicting thoughts, conflicting feelings, conflicting actions. And, when we look at it as an adult, we might have a hard time making sense of it. But when you look at it through a child's point of view, it makes so much sense, right? You're saying, I'm warm, I have food. Also, in general, people who harm children often gain their trust first, right? And so that can be really confusing to a kid, to a young teen, well, they're my friend, or they're my coach, or they're giving me food, or they're giving me a safe place to land. It is hard. And I think that it's something that is so important to talk about and to pull the curtain and let that light in so that people can understand that these stories are complex and are complicated, and it's a child trying to navigate something that they should never have to navigate. And it's so brave and courageous for you to tell this story. And I know there's going to be so many survivors that read your book and feel like they can understand parts of themselves through your story. So I just want to say thank you for sharing that.
Thank you for raising that. It's such an important piece of like you said, a really complicated puzzle. I know for myself, when social services became involved, my gut reaction as a 12 and 13-year-old was to protect the abuser, to deny, because there is some embarrassment also, but also really I wanted to protect this person. And it is very confusing as a child. And I think when it came to the book, talk about how do you dismantle that shame or pick that up off of your shoulders and remove it. But even as an almost 50-year-old woman, I would put the stories in the manuscript, and it would be hard for me to read and to be truthful about. So then I might take pieces back out, and I ultimately said, no, this has to be honest and as raw and hard as it is. And I think that is important for exactly the reason you said, Katie, because I know I'm not alone in those feelings and being in that situation. So I think it is important for others to see themselves in somebody else if they've been there.
I think that's why, it's a common statistic that most people don't disclose until age 52. That's the average age that people disclose childhood sexual abuse. And I think that that's a large part of it. And through my legal representation of survivors, I represented survivors who never told their story until they were 70 or 80 years old. And it's because of that shame that should have never been theirs to begin with. But it was something that they had to grapple with. And these stories help free them up. There's so many survivors that I spoke to who said, I read Chessie's book or another book, and now they'll say they read your book, and it gave them the strength to say, this happened to me too.
I just want to add, for our listeners and anyone who is grappling with being in any kind of circumstance that resembles yours, Mal, there's been in our media recently the story of Alice Munro and her daughter. And her daughter was abused by her stepfather for years. And it turns out that, Alice Munro is a heavily celebrated author. And she knew that her child was being abused, and she went to her death without ever having supported her child through that. And she actually used the material in some of her literature too. And she blamed her daughter too for the relationship. Let's just be clear, whether you're 6 or 16, you cannot be in a relationship with a trusted adult in your family sphere on any grounds, no matter how quote unquote mature you look, how attractive you are, how adult you comport yourself. And there are generations of women out there who've been blamed. And I just want to say, your book is so powerful at dismantling that. And there is a whole generation of people who need to read your book and understand that you were just trying to live and survive and get out of there alive and to have a life. And not everybody could do that in your family. They didn't make it. Your brother didn't make it. Your sister had a different journey as well, sadly. And thank goodness she's alive and she's okay. But her journey, as you share, is different. And so I just want people to recognize this. Children are not just 6-year-olds. They are teens and under the influence of power and economic pressure and all that. So that's my soapbox today that I'm thinking about.
So beautifully stated. And yes, thank you for saying that, Susan. That's so true. And if my sharing my story can help even just one person on that front, it is all more than worth it.
Yeah. You had mentioned earlier that you looked for different people in your life that were kind or could help in some way, and that there were people throughout your journey that did that. I'm thinking of, different friends maybe that you mentioned in your book, or different people at school or within your family. Can you share a little bit about that, the different people that helped you navigate, for those who are listening that are maybe trying to help children in their lives navigate that aren't their own children? What are the people how did people help you navigate, and what advice would you give to adults to help them help children navigate?
Oh, this is there's so many, right? Just peers, friends, again, that might stow me away. Like they would take a chance or bring me in for a few weeks. I cannot underscore enough the importance of school. In terms of providing, at least it was my experience. I know it's not everybody's experience, but the structure of a school day, and in my case, even having breakfast and lunch, having meals, and just giving you the brain power to tackle schoolwork and tackle the day. But also just through school, access to social programs like the Big Brother, Big Sister program. Again, it gets back to what we talked about earlier. The just being seen can be so powerful. I recall being out with my big sister from Clark University, by the way, and I told her just a quick story about something my dad had said in passing. And her reaction was, now, does he always talk like that? And I didn't think there was anything abnormal about my home life at that point in time until that moment. That was an initial clue that, and she didn't say it with judgment. It wasn't harsh, but it was a simple thing that I thought, okay, that raised my antenna, I think, for the first time. So I think that's really important. Back to the school, at a time where I didn't have a place to live and I was truly off on my own. I was no longer living with my mother. My brother was off in a separate group living situation. I don't know where my father was, and my sister, by this point had already been adopted by an aunt. And I'm in my English class as a freshman in high school, and I'm sitting in the back of the room. It's probably getting close to 3 p.m. The end of the school day is quickly approaching, and I don't know what my plan is going to be. And my English teacher, Mrs. Aracy, she noticed me in the back of the room and called me out of class. And she noticed, without my saying anything, that something wasn't right. And long story short there, she took me home for the night. And I'm not advocating for teachers to necessarily put their professional lives on the line, but just the act of, she noticed and she wanted to help. And I saw myself as nobody who would notice me. So things like that. And probably my favorite story, well, all right, probably my favorite story of school. There are two of them that are important, but as a sophomore in high school, my second high school, my guidance counselor, who I don't even know that I really knew at that point in time, he pulled me out of class and he said, there's this scholarship that the state of Massachusetts offers for children who come from a disadvantaged background or are challenged with, they have a difficult socioeconomic situation, but they show promise for going on to college. And someone has to nominate a person for this scholarship for consideration. And I'd like to nominate you. And I thought, oh my gosh, again, somebody saw me and thought I had ability. And that was an important turning point. It paved the way for me to go on to college and made it possible to really change my life in a meaningful way. And if I have time for one more quick one, it's not as uplifting as the last one, Mr. Stoyanoff, my guidance counselor. But there was a point at age 14 when I had a very concrete moment on my way to school where I said, I need to change my life. I'm responsible solely for myself now. Again, there are no other family members attached here that would help us figure this out and navigate eviction and homelessness and all of the things. And so I continued on to school and I went right for the main office, and the two office ladies manning the desk there, I knocked on the door and they asked, or I knocked on the glass, and they asked what I needed. And I said, I think I need a foster home. And they were certainly perplexed, but they connected me with the guidance counselor at that school. And, I think sometimes you have to ask for help, but it really goes such a long way if people can keep their eyes open and look for maybe what somebody's not outwardly telling you, and they might need some help if you can ask and check in a gentle, non-judgmental way.
I hope this comes off the right way, but I'm a mom that was like imagining you as my child, Mal. I'm imagining you when I was reading the book as my child, Mal. And so part of me was like, nobody did enough for you. But at the same time, I want to celebrate teachers who notice their students in the classroom. And that is so important. I remember even with Chessie's experience, her English teacher, I love English teachers. Let's celebrate all the English teachers of the world. He would say to her, if you need a place to come and just to get yourself together, or if you're feeling sad or cry, you've got a space here. And you know what? He had faced trauma. He had lost a brother to suicide. He knew. He had compassion and empathy. So your teacher letting you come home, of course, that probably couldn't happen these days, but at least they did something. And, to everyone out there, to the friend who kept you in the closet that night, which sounds horrible, that is what we're asking, just compassion and empathy, just a teaspoon of it, and how it can change your life. And, we have to be better at that. And that's why we go into schools and talk about this subject matter. We need to take the shroud of shame and just lift us all up to basic empathy for one another.
You said it, Susan. Absolutely. Compassion, empathy. And again, the importance of schools. And I know obviously Chessie didn't have the same experience I did when it comes to a supportive school structure and experience. And that experience is so critical for kids, because if you think about just the sheer amount of time that a child spends in those school walls, if you will, in the course of the day, year after year, there's the most room to probably influence outcomes for a child. And that's, again, why the work that this organization is doing is so critical and meaningful and means good things.
I'm also just constantly impressed by young people. I mean, in your book, I think you were 14, right? When you were standing on the bridge and made the decision that you needed to make a change. And you were 14. I mean, I think so many people don't realize the power and the bravery and the courage and the intelligence that a 14-year-old can have. And that sometimes we just need to listen to them. When they tell us what they need and they tell us what they want, we should listen to them. You know, we work with so many young people, and I'm constantly amazed by their thoughts and their ideas. And I think sometimes we forget that children have their own challenges and things that they're facing at home. And for us to remember that and to meet them where they are and try to support them as best we can.
Absolutely. You know, Katie, when you talked about the power that a 14-year-old has, like, I literally got goosebumps, the chills. It's so true. And we don't always kind of give them that grace and understanding. And I agree, listening without judgment and being there to support is just critical. Absolutely.
And I Have the Right To, we go into schools and we have these discussions, and we really believe that. We believe that they are capable of having these conversations. And not only do we hope to impart some wisdom on them, but Susan, I think you can agree with me, every single time we learn from them. Every single time we go into a school, we learn from them, hopefully just as much as they're learning from us. Just always constantly amazed.
Yes, and just I'd love to share your story, your book, Raising Wrens, with the communities we continue to meet, because I think it just goes to the adage. I mean, you found us, you came to us through one of our board members, Steve Peacock, and you both are in the same line of work in the financial services industry. And I mean, let's just think about that for a minute. You know, when in the normal course of things does your history and childhood life story come into play at work? Not very often. And it's just, again, you can't judge a person from the exterior. We have no idea what it's like to walk in each other's shoes. And kids should read your book, Raising Wrens, to remind ourselves of that. I mean, you come off, let's just say it, as a total badass, successful financial industries executive. You're gorgeous, you're smart, you have it all together, you have a son, you have a great husband, and this is your story. This incredible story of survival and success. And you're not saying you've reached nirvana or anything. It's not, life isn't about perfection. It's just about being real and honest and addressing the trauma in our lives. And here you are. I mean, you are such an inspiration, Mal, to so many. And I would just love kids to look at your story and say, I can do that. I can do this. I can follow her footsteps and advocate for myself. One of the most beautiful authors out there, Bell Hooks, she believes in her book, she writes in All About Love, how important respect for our children is. We don't listen, as you said, Katie, to our children enough about what they need and what they want. And we don't give them the respect they deserve as fully being human. So yes, they need us to get on with in life and to make it through life when they're young, but we need to listen to them and respect them. And thank goodness those couple people in your life did. I know the foster care system was not an easy next step for you. It was really harsh. And, you know, we wouldn't want anyone to have to follow your footsteps there, but you still found a path after that too. I mean, everyone just has to read your book to understand all the levels of trauma and opposition you went through.
Well, thank you. And I think the lesson in that, at least from my experience, is a lot of times it's try again, right? It's you got to just keep trying to put one foot in front of the other. Katie, you might have said that earlier. It's so true. And anybody who does dig into my story, you'll see there's a lot of trial and error there. And so I would just continue to encourage others who are navigating a tough space. If that's one thing I can impart, just keep trying it. Sometimes you take a risk and you open up to someone else to try and get help, and it doesn't go the way you needed it to go. Don't shut down. You might have to find another person, and you might have to find another person after that, but you'll get there.
I love that, Mal. And I just want to throw out a wish for the universe right now with you. And I know Katie's heard this before, and I think I've shared it with you, and you seem amenable to it. So Congresswoman Annie Custer wrote the foreword to Chessie's book, I Have the Right To. She just retired. She's one of the first graduating classes from Dartmouth. She's been a fierce advocate for sexual assault survivors, including Chess, and she's a survivor. I would love to see you go back to Dartmouth with Annie and Chessie and whoever else, because Dartmouth is still dealing with a lot sexual assault cases, and the time is now. I would love to see you have a conversation in your community, your former community that helped lift you up, and you can share your story, your book, and how you were able to gain an education and gain your voice. So Mal, since releasing Raising Wrens, how has your life changed, and what's next for you?
Well, I'll just say that, when I first put my baby Raising Wrens out into the world and into the universe, I thought maybe it would just go quietly, and it might even be kind of awkward, to your earlier point, Susan, working in the financial services space, just in the corporate world in general. You don't necessarily go out and share deeply personal information like the way I did. And I guess I'm just so pleasantly surprised at how open people have been to hearing those important stories in my journey. And the real gift that's come out of that is hearing from all of the people, whether I know them or have never come to meet them before, that have messaged me, reached out, asked to have lunch, and they can relate to my story in some way, even if it's someone from Worcester, like you, Susan, who maybe had a very different experience in Worcester, and they've learned so much, but particularly hearing from other survivors, and they have found power in just having somebody else's story and somebody else they can relate to. That's just been an absolute, it's hard to hear, but it's been an absolute gift to know that there's some power in sharing your story. So I would share that. And I continue to hear from people. It's been just about a year now since I first released the book, and the audiobook just, released around Thanksgiving time. But I will continue to hear from people throughout the week, even still. And every single one of them is a gift for me. And in terms of what's ahead, I'm looking forward to seeing what's next. I really love the idea of being able to use this story, my story, as a way to help drive change and just get that message out more broadly to help other survivors of sexual abuse, trauma, what have you. Yes, so let's go.
That is beautiful, Mal. And I just want to offer to you and say that the same thing that I said to Chessie after she wrote her memoir. You have done an incredible amount of heavy lifting. You have done more than enough for a lifetime. of heavy lifting. And we are here as an organization for you. If you would ever need us to help any of the people that reach out to you, respond to them, we are happy to do that for you, because you've shared so much of yourself. You can rest, and you deserve a rest. And just to do whatever you need to do for yourself, because, we are here to advocate on your behalf and all the students coming after you. So I just want to leave you with that thought.
Thank you. Way to, as soon as you said that, my shoulders they went down a little bit. but I am excited about what's ahead as well, and looking forward to being a part of it all.
Thank you so much for listening. Like and subscribe to the podcast on all platforms. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends about Aspire. Follow us on social media at I Have the Right To. Learn more about our student and executive programming at our website at ihavetherightto.org.